I've recently picked up more and more fighting games lately, and it's a genre that I continue to have more love for. From Street Fighter 6 being easy for new players to get into the franchise to the stellar cast of Mortal Kombat 1. However, there's a third juggernaut of fighting games that just doesn't get nearly as much love as the other two. That is, of course, Tekken. And with the release of Tekken 8 and after slowly diving into the universe of fighting games, I figured now's the time for me to ultimately give this series a shot. So here's my brutally honest review of Tekken 8. We start with the gameplay as always. My fear coming into this game was the same fear that I had with Street Fighter 6 earlier last year, that Tekken 8 may not be kind to new players of the franchise. Fortunately, for the most part, Tekken 8 was very accommodating to new fans of the series. This was largely in part due to the introduction of Special Style. Special Style made it easy for new players to enjoy the feeling of creating combos, which is basically the bread and butter of Tekken. Essentially, it's very similar to modern controls from Street Fighter 6, but a little less control of different attacks. For example, Special Style allows you to do one special attack for each of the main 4 attack buttons, while also giving you a few more attacks with directional inputs and square if you're playing on PlayStation, of course. Unfortunately, this limits the amount of combos at your disposal, but for someone like me who has trouble creating combos and memorizing movesets of different characters, it's much better than anything I can pull off on my own. Taking a look at the roster, it seems like Tekken really wanted to pull out all the stops to make sure they surpass their rivals, as the roster comes in at a beautiful 32 characters at launch with more to come. This almost doubles the amount of Street Fighter 6's roster, as well as beating MK1, assuming you don't count the cameo fighters. And if you're concerned with fighters feeling the same as each other, then thankfully that's not the case. Each fighter in Tekken 8 has their own style, with one fighter even taking inspiration from a classic Tekken character. Personally, my favorites are Reina, Law, and Paul. Tekken 8 also introduces a new mechanic known as the Heat Drive. This ability adds a new level of risk versus reward, as you're able to use this drive to create massive combo attacks that'll deal out a ton of damage. However, you need to be careful when using the Heat Drive, as you'll only be able to do it once per round, so choose wisely. On top of the Heat Drive, you have Rage Mode, which has been in the franchise since Tekken 6, I believe. Rage allows you to turn the tables on your opponent, as it'll activate when you're close to losing a round. If you can land a Rage attack, you'll deal massive damage to your opponent in an effort to change things around for yourself. Tekken 8 offers a lot more content than I've seen in previous fighting games. For example, you have Tekken Ball, which pits 2 players against each other, in which they use a beach ball to deal damage to each other. You have Arcade Quest, which is basically a tutorial with its own unique story to keep you entertained while learning the controls of the game. You have character episodes and the main story too, but we'll cover that later on when I talk about the story of the game. And finally, the online play. As to be expected with a fighting game, online play is a massive deal to the players. I mean, this is a competitive game, and without a steady online experience, the game would die not long after release. Well, I'm pleased to announce that I haven't run into a single issue online. Knock on wood. No crashing, no connection issues, nothing of the kind. Everything went smoothly for me. Speaking of online, similar to Street Fighter 6, you have a lobby where you can chat and meet other players in the server, and most importantly, challenge them to a fight. Plus, there are so many cool features in the game itself. Ghost Player, which is basically an AI created version of yourself to fight against, and even other AIs of other players. Save Replay, which allows you to record specific encounters and combos that let you get advice on how to improve each time. And you even have some sort of customization for both your avatar and even the characters, where you can change up their look, their hairstyle, and make your character and your fighters each unique to your own personality. While the customization probably isn't as crazy as Street Fighter 6, it's still a welcomed feature. Overall, the gameplay was great with onboarding new players and pleasing veteran players. While there are some things that I wish it included and one more additional mode that I wish was added, the online features and the overall gameplay of Tekken 8 was a massive success in my book. The story of Tekken 8 is an interesting topic because, in a way, there's technically 3 story modes of the game. First off, you have the main story of Tekken 8. Here you primarily play as Jin as he looks to prepare himself for the ultimate final fight against his father. With his father out of the way, Kazuya has now maintained global control, and it's up to Jin and his friends to stop him once and for all. Obviously, I'm not going to jump into spoiler territory here, but there are plenty of positives that come from the main story of Tekken 8. For one, the visuals are truly stunning. I'm honestly impressed with how gorgeous this game looks. Like, I thought Street Fighter 6 was incredible, but looking at the visuals here and the cutscenes throughout the story mode, I think it's fair to say that this is easily the best looking fighting game of all time. Also, the cinematic fight scenes are truly insane.
茶番はいい。さっさとデビル化するがいい。お前を殺し、すべてを終わらせる。
I swear, it's like watching Dragon Ball Z in live action. The music always kept me hyped throughout the story, especially some of the tracks near the end of the game during the massive final boss fight. And while the story did focus primarily on Jin, we did get to see some characters stand out a bit on their own. Personally, two of my favorites from the story mode were Reina and Elisa. Full disclosure, I didn't watch any of the trailers, so I don't know what was revealed and what was not. So to avoid potentially spoiling any key elements from the story, I'll just say that I really enjoyed what they did with Reina's backstory and Elisa's commitment to her friends. Enough said. Oh, and the final boss, I honestly don't know what to say. It's never ending, but in a good way. The main story wasn't perfect, but as always, I'll cover that when I get to the negatives. Moving on to the character episodes, which are basically additional side stories for each Tekken character. The episodes provided an introduction cutscene and a final cutscene for each character in the game after completing 5 fights. Now, honestly, I haven't played through all of them yet, but from the ones that I did play through, most of the side stories were really what-if scenarios or dream scenarios from the players. Still, each episode provided a little more insight into each character of the game. Finally, the last story mode of the game is Arcade Quest. Technically, this mode is kind of a glorified tutorial mode with no voice lines. It basically follows your created avatar as they look to become the World Tekken Champion by beating opponents at different arcades. While the story isn't anything grand or interesting in the slightest, I thought it was a clever way to handle the tutorial. Although I do wish something in the main menu told me that Arcade Quest was the tutorial, because honestly, I didn't even realize that was the case until after I finished the main story. Even though I was extremely happy with Tekken 8, there are some things that I was disappointed with overall. Similar to my review on The Lost Crown though, most of them are kind of personal preferences. Let's start with the gameplay. I mentioned earlier that Tekken 8 was fairly kind to new players with the introduction of special style. However, lately Tekken has become a franchise that prides itself on air combos, and these combos can be extremely brutal for new players competing online. So, even though new players had the benefit of using special style, the moment you went online, you'll find yourself at a massive disadvantage if that's the only way you knew how to play. That's because using a special style would prevent you from using certain combos, which therefore limited your options. The major problem here is that when you pair a newer player using special style against a veteran of the series using default style, chances are you're going to end up getting launched into the air by someone like Nina and ultimately going from 100 to 0 in a single combo attack.
You're finished.
Mortal Kombat 1 actually was pretty clever with countering this, thanks to a command that could get you out of it. And Street Fighter 6 limited the length of an air combo, but Tekken 8 is not so kind in that department. Also, I had a few minor complaints with the story. One issue relates to the involvement of side characters. I know the story of Tekken has always revolved around the Mishima family, but I would have liked a little more involvement with other storylines. And while we're on the topic of the characters, I'm not a huge fan of the fighters speaking in their own native languages to each other, and somehow everybody understands everybody.
As declared, Kazuya Mishima is sanctioning nations that were defeated during the preliminaries.
If the tournament completes at this rate, the nation's hierarchy will become solidified.
Qu'une hiérarchie s'établisse et que les humains commencent à se battre. C'était justement pour empêcher tout cela de se produire qu'Eiichi Mishima avait affronté le démon.
I appreciate the respect to the background of each character, but it made the interactions between the characters in the story a little awkward. I wish they had given the players multiple different settings to choose from, like a full English or Japanese dub setting for the main story. I don't have a problem with the intros of each character being in their native languages, but as far as the story goes, I just wish it could have been all dubbed in a single language based on your region like we saw with Street Fighter 6 and MK. And two modes that I would have died to see included in the game is a Tekken Tag mode and a tournament mode that can be played online and offline. I know that some tournaments are held online every now and then, but I would have appreciated if the server you were in had some sort of tournament mode that players can enter constantly instead of waiting for special events. But let's be real, I'm sure I would have been eliminated right away, so I don't know why I would have wanted something like that. As for Tekken Tag mode, I get that's a whole different system that requires balancing to make it work, but even if it was a feature for offline play only with friends instead of competitively, then that would have been an easy W in my book. Still, the lack of these two modes don't really take points off of the game, as it's more of a wish list that I personally have for Tekken. I can't believe I'm about to say this, but Tekken actually beat both Street Fighter and MK this generation. So, as a fairly casual fan of the franchise with maybe 1 or 2 prior games in my catalog, I really enjoy Tekken 8, even more so than any of the other AAA fighting games that released in the last year. With that being said, my final verdict for Tekken 8 is a 9 out of 10. Tekken 8 has Game of the Year potential here. Sure, it's not perfect. There are some things that I found myself disappointed with. However, most features I disliked are honestly just personal preferences. The story not having an English dubbed setting, the lack of a Tekken Tag mode, and the lack of a tournament mode are all just personal preferences, and in no way should it affect the score. With only minor issues, I can't find myself taking away more than a single point from this title. But that's it for this episode of Nerdspace Games. Have you played Tekken 8, and if so, did you enjoy it as much as I did? Also, are you a newbie to the series, or a casual, or a veteran, as I would love to know other perspectives on this game. Anyway, thanks for watching, and as always, I'll catch you guys on the next episode of Nerdspace Games. Take care.